In today's video, using only a table saw, we are going to be creating some beautiful picture frames for these amazing posters from the Landmark Project. I'm gonna give a shout out to the Landmark Project for making this video possible, and we're gonna talk a little bit more about them later. But let's go ahead and dive in to making these picture frames. The first thing you wanna do when making picture frames is determine the size of your artwork. These posters are 12 inches by 16 inches. We're gonna be making these picture frames out of oak, and even though our artwork is 12 by 16, that's the inside of the frame, so to speak. So the outside of the picture frame is going to measure longer. So I'm gonna show you how to use an online picture frame dimension calculator. There's some really complicated algebra that we could do to determine this, but I just like to Google picture frame calculator, and you can input some certain variables and it'll give you what dimensions your stock needs to be. So I have some longer pieces of oak that's 1 inch thick. I'm gonna use this to create our picture frames. These picture frames are going to be 1.5 inches thick. Okay, so what we're going to do next is cut 1/4 inch rabbet along the corners of all of these boards. The reason I'm doing 1/4 inch is because when I am putting all of the elements of the frame together later in the video, so stay tuned, this will make more sense, but we'll have the backing board, which is 1/8 inch plywood, we'll have the artwork, and then the plexiglass that I'm using for the front of the frame, which is also 1/8 inch. So that's how we got 1/8 plus 1/8, 1/4 inch rabbet. So my table saw set up, I have my blade set to 1/4 inch high, and I have the fence 1/4 inch away from the outside of the blade. So I'm going to take a strip of the oak, and we're going to run it through this way, and then we'll turn it and run it through this way, and that should create two cuts to make, the rabbit. So we have all of our rabbets cut. This is what we cut out of each of these boards. And so when we make a frame, you can kind of start to see where the artwork and the glass or plexiglass will fit. So all the rabbets are here, and you can play pick-up sticks with these, or use them as fire starters or stir sticks, or you can just throw them away. What I'm going to do next is totally optional, but I think it does add a nice touch to the frames. I have my blade set to roughly 45 degrees, does not have to be super precise. And what I'm gonna do is, on the same end of these boards where I cut my rabbet, same side but opposite end, I guess, I'm just gonna cut a little 45-degree bevel. Now you don't want to cut all the way to this line right here. So sometimes it's good to sneak up on the depth of this bevel. But I'm just going to cut some strips out here, and this will be a decorative element for our picture frames once they're complete. To make sure I put my table saw at exactly 45 degrees, I'm gonna use a digital angle gauge. So what I'm gonna do first is, hopefully you guys can see this okay, my floor in my shop is not perfectly level. So there's about a 0.7 degree angle. So I'm basically going to zero this out. Do this. Put this at 0 and then reference my blade against that to make sure I get to exactly 45 degrees. Oops. So one of the really important factors when building a picture frame is you want to make sure not only are your angles perfectly 45 degrees, but you also want to make sure that the opposite lengths of the picture frame are the exact same length. Otherwise, it'll throw off your angle. So what I'm doing is I'm making cuts 2 at a time. So I have a 45-degree cut here. I feel with my finger, I make sure these are flush, and then I'll make the second cut so I know that these 2 pieces are exactly the same length. Okay, so here are the components. We have the 14 5/8. Remember, that's on the long side of the trapezoid. And we have the, in my case, 18 5/8 on the long side of the trapezoid. So the short side of the trapezoid, that's gonna be the length of your artwork. So 16 inches and 12 inches. Now remember, use the calculator, because if you're using different measurements than I am for your rabbets or for your width, you're gonna have a different final length. But when we put this together, we want to make sure we did all of our angles correctly. This is what the frame is going to start to look like. And kind of adjust everything. And you can see now this decorative 45 just gives a nice bevel to the inside of the picture frame. Also, just to check my measurements, because we did have a fudge factor, I'll throw my artwork into the frame at this point before the glue up, just to make sure it fits. And it has a little bit of extra room, but it's not much at all. So this is really a perfect fit, so we'll keep going. So I have the components of my 3 picture frames. Before we go into the final glue up of these picture frames, we're gonna do a pre-glue up, so to speak. Now, this is the end grain part of the board. And so what we're going to do is put some glue on here, just a little bit, and let it dry, so that when we do our final glue up, this will stick together much better. Remember, the end grain, it's like a bunch of straws facing this way. And so if we tried to glue this picture frame together, the glue would seep down into that part of the wood and it wouldn't stick together very well. For the glass portion of the frames, I'm actually going to use plexiglass. This is what I get. You can get this at a big box store like a Lowe's or a Home Depot. It's just acrylic sheet that has this protective film on it, and you can cut it on a table saw. I get 1/8 of an inch or 2 millimeter thick version of this, and it cuts really, really well on the table saw. So we're gonna go ahead and cut these up, and these we will cut up to be 12 inches by 16 inches, the same size as our artwork. For the backing of these frames, I'm going to use some 1/8 inch thick plywood. You can pick this up at pretty much any home center, and once again, it's really easy to cut up on the table saw. So up next, we're going to go ahead and glue this frame together. Turn this way. Now, I believe there are clamps that you can get to clamp picture frames together, but we are building this picture frame with only one tool. So we're gonna be using some painter's tape. This has a pretty low tack, and so it will not leave much adhesive, but it'll also hold these pieces together while the glue dries. I'm not gonna use too much glue. I'll tell you why here in just a second. Now, right about now, you may be thinking, okay, we've glued up the picture frame. It's been a few hours, so now it's just time to sand it and stain it. But we actually have one more super, super important step. because we have glued ingrain to ingrain, even though we did the little trick with letting the glue dry and come back and gluing it up later, this is still not a strong joint. And over time, you could probably, hang this on the wall and it would be good for a little while. But as seasons change and the moisture in the room where these are hanging changes, eventually these joints will fail. And if you're selling these one day, you might have your customer say, hey, your frame totally fell apart. And so we're going to reinforce each one of these joints using a spline. Now I'm going to use a jig in this video. If you want me to make a full video on how I created the jig, let me know in the comments below and we can get to that. But it's a super simple jig and I'm showing it to you right here. And you could probably create it on your own. Let's go ahead and start cutting these splines. Okay, you have two options when you're deciding what to do with your splines. You can either try to hide the splines. So since these are oak frames, you could use oak to fill back in, or you could show them off. And I'm gonna do that by using black walnut. Black walnut and oak, I think, look amazing together, especially after we put a clear coat of polyurethane on. So what I'm gonna do, I've cut this. This is the same width as my table saw blade. And I'm gonna cut it into little squares and then glue these, or little triangles really, and then glue these into the picture frame. Now that this glue has cured, I'm gonna take a flush trim saw and trim up the extra parts of these splines that are hanging out. For the finish of these frames, we're not gonna do anything crazy. I'm just gonna use some clear coat. I think this is semi-gloss, or it's actually warm satin polyurethane. We've let the polyurethane dry, and now it's time for the fun part. It's time to put everything together in the picture frame. I've taken the protective film off of the plexiglass. I'm gonna drop that in there. Try to not have dust inside of it. Next up, we're going to take our poster, our artwork, place that there. Finally, I'm gonna put my backing board right inside the frame. I'm gonna use these little picture frame backing holders. You can't really see that, there you go. So I put about 5 on here. Where you place them does not matter too much, as long as it holds the backing in place. I'm using an owl to start off my screw. The last thing I'm going to do is put a picture frame hanger at the top of the picture frame. Hey, thank you so much for checking out this video. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or maybe something that you would change about building these picture frames. Once again, I want to thank the Landmark Project. They make tons of amazing posters. They have one for almost every national park and lots of state parks too. Landmark Project just celebrates tons of the natural beauty that we have here in America. So go check them out. They have tons of great posters and other merch as well. Hey, on your way out, leave a like if this has been helpful for you. Feel free to subscribe. We're always making fun projects in the woodworking shop. I hope to see you very soon.